The latter part of this bull run, we might add. In October 90, starting out at only 7 5/8. Don't you wish you bought that one? July 1997, 62, $1,000, now worth $8,131 today. We're going to be taking a look at the laggards of the Dow a little later, and incidentally, with the news that we heard about AT&T and Mr. Walter resigning, AT&T was the second worst performing stock in the Dow. We'll show you how it did and what your $1,000 would be worth. Over to you, Joe.
Thank you, Sue. You know, my mission, if I chose to accept it, was to try and figure out, Ron, some of the biggest of banks, so that doesn't really fit in as well. You just, by the way, interviewed Mr. Templeton. He gets evangelical when he talks about the stock market. I find myself getting that way when I talk about the promise of drugs or biotechnology. It also seems to coincide with when baby boomers started aging. We're all living longer. We all want to have better health. I'd like to live to about 140, to be honest with you, and I hope I'm still working here.
So do I.
Anyway, I started with, how about drugs? Let's start with Merck. What else? What is the best way to prevent further medical care down the road? And hopefully, even though the drug makers were hit with some of the blame for rising medical costs, if you can do it with drugs and not with surgery or hospitalization, that may be the cheapest and the best way to do it. You remember, Ron, antibiotics changed the world in the 20th century. Imagine what the next 100 years are going to be like. It's going to be unbelievable. How about biotech? I mean, we used to have to find out that bread mold suddenly you know, kills bacteria. That's the way we used to discover things. Now we can look at a problem and rationally design an answer to that problem. Makes you think of Amgen. Let's look at what Amgen has done over the past 7 years. You talk about making some money there. Unbelievable. What about medical device makers? The one that came to mind immediately was Medtronic, and I want to see how that has done.
Now, for those people not familiar with Medtronic, this makes it implantable defibrillators.
But not only that, Ron, they make a drug pump that you put beyond the blood-brain barrier to treat chronic pain, and you turn it on with the remote control. They take muscle from your back, and they wrap it around your heart, and instead of being striated normal muscle, they get it firing like your heart for people that are waiting for another heart to come in. Who would have thought that we would go in a minimally advanced financial group? What better to look at than perhaps Citicorp? And I just can't help but think about that Saudi prince buying all that stock at $10 a share, Ron.
Al-Walid.
Al-Walid, and he is fairly happy at about 140 or wherever it is right now.
No doubt. All right, thanks, Joe. We'll see you again a little later in the program. Joe will be back on Dow 8000 in a few minutes. All right, he is known as Mr. Bull on Wall Street. He called 7,000 at 3,000, and now he's calling for 10,000 within a year. You'll meet him next when CNBC's special report, Dow 8000, continues in just a moment. When the Dow crossed 8,000 today, it was the 32nd record-closing high for the Dow Industrial Average so far this year. That compares to 44 new highs last year. Well, the man we're going to talk to next has seen them all coming so far. Ralph Acampora is Prudential Securities Chief Market Analyst now, and Maria Bartiromo has him at the New York Stock Exchange. Maria?
Thank you, Ron. Well, before I turn it over to Ralph, let me just point out that a couple of traders did just note to me that at the closing bell, we actually did see some selling into the strength. Look at Intel. It was very, very strong today. It did actually close off of its best levels of the session. Hewlett-Packard and Lucent Technology, same situation. So a little selling at the closing bell today, but nonetheless a stunning performance for the market as the Dow did exceed 8,000. I introduced you now Ralph Acampora of Prudential Securities. Ralph, before we begin, I should congratulate you. You really have been one of the best predictors of this market, targeting Dow 7,000 in 1995 when the Dow was at 4,500, right? Yep. So let me ask you where we go next.
Maria, I think this is the early stage of the acceleration portion of the bull market that I talked about 2 years ago, which means that the tide comes in and lifts more and more boats. You see a lot of action on that tape, but it's not only blue chip, it's small and mid caps, and I think there's a lot more to come.
Today in particular, we did see a real breakout in some of those Russell 2000 stocks. What specific stocks are you recommending?
Well, it's really across the board. It isn't one specific area. I'm seeing paper stocks. I'm seeing retailing stocks. I'm seeing drug stocks. It's very, 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 very bullish market.
So some specific stock picks?
Yeah, I like Sun Microsystems a lot. I know it was up today again today. I still like the Dow stocks like Allied and Caterpillar Tractor. I think the airlines and the railroads like Union Pacific. I like everything.
Such an anecdotal piece of information here. I know that you recently got a present because of your right predictions. You want to tell us about that, Ralph?
Yeah, well, it was kind of like a gift to say it was one of the best calls my CEO has ever seen, a man by the name of Wick Simmons. And he asked me, what would I like as a gift? And I jokingly said I'd like a 1962 red Corvette, and 2.5 weeks later, there it was.
Oh, my goodness. And the license plate?
Dow 7000.
Well, that's terrific.
Yeah, thanks.
And what about the money flows? We are seeing continued money flows into the market, but does it concern you when every once in a while we will see a sharp fall off in some of the money into mutual funds?
Yeah, I think you can't have it constantly flowing, but you can see it pulling back a little bit, and I think that would be maybe a reason for a short-term pause in the market. But Maria, there's too much dynamism in it, too much cash on the sidelines. It's coming in.
Ron?
Ralph, let me ask you, you know, when you do turn cautious on this stock market, now that you're getting close to achieving guru status, something that people both love and fear at the same time.
Yes.
What would it take to turn you bearish on this market?
Well, all along, Ron, and I've written 5 pieces on the secular bull, and in every piece that I wrote, there was always a caveat, and the caveat is we had a dramatic rise in rates. And I'm not talking 25 or 50 basis points. He honestly felt that that interest rates would go to 8 or 9 or 10%. The bull market's over. I don't see that happening. In fact, I think rates between now and the end of the year might actually go down to 6%. But you asked the question, and that's my one biggest fear.
Are there anything, any items in technical analysis that you follow, any indicators that flash any caution signs whatsoever?
No. I know it sounds strange,
No, okay.
Ron. I know it sounds strange, but the thing that's going to get me out of this market is going to be psychology. And a lot of people are saying this is speculative activity. There is no speculation here. Just look at the new high list. Just look at the broadness of that list and look at the quality of the names. When we get to a point where there's a lot of junk running, then I'll worry. But I talk to too many people, and they're still very, very skeptical, believe it or not.
But individual investors aren't that skeptical, Ralph. They throw money dollars by the billions at the stock market month after month after month. Yeah. I know you're used to dealing with professional sentiment, but when individuals are that bullish, what do you say?
Well, Ron, I deal with the public all the time. I give lectures almost every night during the week. And I have to say, as far as I'm concerned, the public is passively in the market. Yes, their 401k is coming in, but Mrs. O'Brien checked the box off 2 years ago. I don't think she realized that every paycheck that money's coming out. Now, you talk to the managers of brokerage offices, ask them, and I'm sure you're going to find out that they're not standing online like you would be at a bakery shop with a number trying to get the next hot tip. They're not doing that yet. They will eventually.
All right, Ralph, good to see you. Thanks for joining us. Appreciate you coming by here. Thanks also
Ron.
to our own Maria Bartiromo at the New York Stock Exchange. Well, Dow 8000 sounds great on Wall Street, but how does it play in Middle America? For some reaction, now we go live to Kankakee, Illinois, where Scott Cohn is standing by. Scott?
Ron, you see all the big trading floors on Wall Street. Well, this is where the real action happens. Edward Jones Investments in Kankakee, Illinois. We'll be live from here to tell you what people here are saying when our special coverage continues.
The CNBC Weather Center. It might just be the best mousetrap we've ever made.
Our regularly scheduled program will not be seen in order to bring you this special CNBC report.
Good day, everyone, and welcome back to a CNBC special report, Dow 8,000. Over the next 3 hours, we'll find out what's made this bull market go, who has won, who has lost, and how you should be positioning your portfolio for the months and years ahead. Well, it was indeed a record day on Wall Street. Some helpful economic numbers, a big drop in interest rates, and surging technology stocks all combining to lift the Dow Industrial Average to its 32nd record-closing high of the year and its first ever close above the 8,000 level. Let's recap the facts and figures on Wall Street for this July 16th. The Dow Industrial Average up 63 points to 8,038.88 on whopping volume of 649 million shares. That would be about the 6th busiest day in New York Stock Exchange history, while the transportation average on the day also did better, as did a host of other averages. In fact, as we run down the numbers, you will see that the NASDAQ closed at a record high as well. The 10th straight record closing high, 38.5 points the gain, a record single point gain for the NASDAQ ever, and volume there stunning, 839.4 million shares. As for the Standard & Poor's 500, it finished up almost 11 in record ground. The Russell 2000 up almost 4, and the MX Market Value Index did better as well, picking up 3 points to end the day at 638.03. All right, let's get an update now on today's other headlines. For that, we turn to Ted David at the news desk. Ted?
All right, Ron, thank you very much. A shakeup at AT&T. John Walter is out. He resigned today as president after AT&T's board decided not to elevate him to the position.
You know, in the 1980s, one could argue that the only people who got rich from the bull market on Wall Street were the people who lived on Wall Street. Today, that is not the case. There are people all around the country benefiting from the action in the southern corridor of Manhattan. Joining us now to find out what the pulse of the rest of the nation thinks about this bull market in Kankakee, Illinois, is our own Scott Cohn. Scott?
Ron, Kankakee, Illinois is middle America, population about 30,000, some 60 miles south of Chicago. You know, we spent some time on Court Street in downtown Kankakee talking to some folks this afternoon, and if you think that people around here aren't wise to the ways of Wall Street, think again. People understand that there's quite a ride going on here, and they're enjoying it. With us is Trent Hammerlink, who manages the Edward Jones Investment Office here.
All right, we do have to apologize for interrupting Scott Cohn. We're clearly having some difficulty, technical difficulties with our signal coming from Kankakee, Illinois. We have the hopes to get back in touch with Scott momentarily to get, again, the most interesting information coming from Main Street. All right, well, happy days on Wall Street with the Dow above 8,000. It's taken just over 5 months for the Dow to go 1,000 points. Now, that is really just a blink of an eye compared to the time that it took for the blue chips to break the first millennium mark. With that in mind, we offer you a brief recap of the Dow's history. In May of 1896, baseball is popular, but not a pastime. Grover Cleveland is in the White House, and a man named Charles Dow invents a stock market average that will come to symbolize capitalism for the next 100 years. When 1896 was over, the Dow was a tad above 40, and it would take 26 years for the Dow to cross its first century mark. In the fall of 1929, the Dow climbed to an unheard of 381 before crashing back to Earth to herald the beginning of the Great Depression. It wasn't until 1954, 25 years later, that the blue chip average returned to its pre-crash levels. Let's swim to the moon. In 1966, when Vietnam was just a conflict and Watergate just a hotel, the Dow touched 1,000 for the first time ever. In the 1970s, disco fever swept the nation, but the Dow missed the beat. 2 Arab oil embargoes and spiraling inflation triggered a 2-year bear market that knocked stocks for a loop.
So help me God.
The Dow began its upward climb once more with the election of a former actor in 1980. With Ronald Reagan in the White House, the Dow soared to 2722 by August of 1987.
Panic, complete panic. Everyone's going crazy.
The October crash put a temporary damper on the party, but it all got going again in 1991. And the Dow hasn't looked back since, hitting 5,000 in late 1995, 6,000 in 96, 7,000 last February, and now Dow 8,000. right, when we come back, our special coverage of the Dow's crossing 8,000 continues. We'll get the perspective from one long-term bear and one really long-term bull. We'll do that when Dow 8000 continues in just a minute.
In Tonight, every Saturday and Sunday at